Dr. G here, looking at student questions from COM 2143 Digital Media Literacy, and hopefully putting together a series of responses that are coherent, thoughtful, sourced when possible, and ultimately enlightening. Certainly a goal for our student body, but really when we're making great use of various platforms, it's an opportunity to engage a wider group than simply the students in any given class. But that is our primary focus. That is our primary objective. And that's who these messages are tailored for. But guess what? The questions are tailored for the context of this class too. Let me turn to a couple of questions from Tyler. Appreciate what Tyler has to say. Writing from the Spreadable Media introduction, Why Media Spreads, in pages 1 through 22. 1 through 22? I guess that's the context of the question. I think the introduction itself a bit longer, but what do you find to be so fascinating about the spread of media? Oh, a personalized question. It is astounding how deeply media impacts society and shapes culture. I mean, is that on the money enough of a response? This has always been the case that media has had this persuasive potentiality, it being, mass media and spreadability continue to evolve in unique ways that are not only important, but I would contend they're essential for people to study and understand. Now, if we're coming at it from, a major in communication, yeah, absolutely. This could be an emphasis area now, and your emphasis area could change in the future. There's more people not studying media in the field of communication than there are. But that's because there's so many subdisciplines. There's so many areas you can study. If you deepen and simultaneously broaden, widen is the better term. Widen and deepen your time invested in the discipline, which is why people get advanced degrees, right? But for those of us, first of all, this was already true before media was increasingly ever present. It is essentially omnipresent at this point. I mean, there's no generation it is not impacting right now on Earth. And there's no longer an age kind of cutoff, or whether you're younger or older. Everyone is engaging with it in some form or fashion. And how is that not so prescient that we immediately recognize the value? And so that drives me. There's a passion to be able to understand, not only, maybe the constructive natures of media is one thing, but also it's the context of the content, but also its effects and how it moves people and moves through people. A nice maybe tie back to talking about how grassroots initiatives utilize human labor to move messages, but often, as we see, through digital spaces. Yeah, media stuff. It's interesting. There's just a pedagogical calling to that, right? We want people to be more literate about the media that they engage. Nobody's shutting off. No, there's not a giant switch that someone's like turning and then we're going to stop engaging with media content. But we can absolutely become more numb to what it's doing if we're not, as scholars would say, reflexive of it. If we're not actively reflecting on what it's saying and what kinds of impact it has on us, how it might be influencing us, whatever kind of media it is. Let's jump books to Marcel Denise's Chapter 11, Online Popular Culture, pages 263 through 79. First question here. Before online pop culture, how did pop culture spread? Is this a trick question? I feel if this was a Jeopardy category, rest in peace. Alex, I'd be rolling through this. Like, I'd get on a roll here before, I would be stomped into the ground by like a astrophysicist or something. Yeah, all available means of pop culture spread, like print advertising, literacy, radio. There were film reels when you would go to the movies. You get commercials now, but film reels were kind of like, we'll give you news bits and other types of integrated messages. Television, word of mouth, you get ideas everywhere. Pop culture has always spread, right? That's why it's popular culture, and not like forgettable culture or unpopular culture, right? Whatever that is. Hacky sacks. Next question. If online pop culture is something that won't ever change, I'm interpreting here. It says won't ever change. How do we handle the negatives it brings to teenagers? So how will it not change? Maybe it will change. I don't know. Hard to prognosticate. But, here's where I would date this question. I would draw a line in the sand and say, but let's also consider, this used to be an easy go-to, right? I'd say like 2015 and before. We say like, oh, you youth, oh, you kids better look out. That, the internet's full of like boogeymen and, stuff like that, right? Dark corners and everything. And I think, like a 2016 present is like, adults, people that, don't know how algorithms work on social media. The internet's a dangerous place, right? You might be getting, unique tailored messages that, are reshaping, right, the hardwiring in your ideological outlook. How was that? How was that for just a case study example? A total hypothetical, right? It's, where are we at? How do we handle the negatives it brings teenagers? All right. Other question, other response I did prepare here is, this is why we talk about, let's assume the question is like youth focused, and I think this is where Tyler's going, because if I'm not mistaken, Tyler has some involvement, right, as a kind of youth leader, youth helper, and that's important work. I can't undercut the difficulty that like the and pressure is the wrong word, but the responsibility and the ethical significance that those that work with youth face, and they do. So it's always a hats off, and they need our support, because it's a challenging role to occupy. This is why we talk about being media literate, right? So I'm getting serious now and say it's more than media literacy, digital media literacy, these terms that we are using in this class. That's more than just a collegiate or professional tool. It's a significant ethical role that we're contending adults need to comprehend. And let's keep it in that context of with youth and young people and children. It is this, or it is turn a blind eye, either consciously or unconsciously, right? I mean, there's such a thing as, I just didn't know. But is that enough anymore to just go, well, I just didn't know the kids knew how to, hack into, and deplete my bank account or whatever, right? There's not knowing, and then there's not, and then there's like intentionally not knowing, this was the difference between conscious and unconscious efforts here. But regardless, content is out there in its various forms, and digital media literacy as a concept, as a practice, is important for us, because we, at some point, we're mentoring somebody, we're an influence on someone, and we need to know how to be the right advocate to aid the betterment of them, and maybe the betterment of ourselves, right? there's an early temptation when social media became a much more like combative, we can use that that's often written about now, toxic kind of space. When that was first a newer phenomenon, it was very shocking, right? We had shocking responses. And there's this strong temptation to just jump into any one of these kind of like wild wielding dialogues. And is that the healthiest, right? Is that what we want to be doing with our time? Or are we going to accomplish any kind of like civil resolution? Are we going to change people's minds? And increasingly that answer is no. And thus, we see like, well, then what's the ethical point? Or what can I do that's not this, but is not nothing, right? That has a helpfulness to it. And we want to be sensitive to when those opportunities arise or when they're needed from us. And we may not want to intervene and help someone else kind of gain more, media literacy, but do we have an ethical obligation? Arguably. Let's look at a couple of questions from Maria, starting with a reaction to spreadable media, viral reaction. Page 6, the migration of individuals versus the flow of ideas. All right, so that's a concept, that's a phrasing used by these authors. And Maria writes, is spreadability more hardware-based? Example, physical tech like cell phones, laptops, wearable tech, or software-based, Facebook ads, Google ads, Twitter. And my immediate response is why it's a valuable question is we want to approach this and think less on an either or kind of spectrum and look at it as a both and, except that it includes more factors than this even, right? It's not just the digital means with which we can encounter messages and communicate, but that expands in other ways. Next question. This passage talks about stickiness and spreadability. Is it possible to have one without the other, or are they completely intertwined? That's a good question because it's relating to the heart of the book. And I think the first time I read through this book, I was wanting to. My natural urge was to assess these terms on a dualistic, right? That is like an oppositional spectrum. Like it's either spreadable or it's sticky, right? And that's not it at all. And that's not the author's intent. But what they're doing is they're building upon one term to help explain newer phenomenons and offshoots. I've already mentioned once, so I'll keep it really short. But Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point is a source that they point to say, this book really unpacks stickiness in its original intent. And I mentioned that it's, that was a term and a phrasing used in advertising in the ad world, right? The idea of like, you want your business to be sticky, to have stickiness. You want your, but prior to the internet, you want a campaign to have stickiness, right? That is to say, people gravitate toward it. That's it can't only be sticky is one of the earliest arguments that Jenkins Ford and Green are making in the book is it's beyond that, and it needs to be, right? This is where they use this motto that you all are picking up on. I've seen it so many times in your words is if it doesn't spread, it's dead. And this is that idea of like stickiness alone isn't enough, right? These have to complement one another. Let's go off book here. Use a different example. I know we've been talking a lot and you all are doing a great job processing this along the lines of like media things, especially digital things, internet based. But let's think about, I'm going to use like a biggie, right? I'm going to use like Disney Corporation. And let's think about something like Walt Disney World, right? I guess we just call it Disney World now, like Disneyland. These are physical spaces, and their focus is to draw people in, right? They want people to, this is why it's called a destination site. They want people to travel to that location and then invest, right? They're investing their time, they're investing their their labor, their energy, they're investing their money to these physical sites, these most popular tourist attraction sites in the world, these commercial products, and Disneyland, Disney World especially. These are sticky, right? And what do I mean? Like, they've been around. They have been around since their inception. This is to say they didn't go away, even though they're brick and mortar type physical locations. Why? Because they have stickiness. But is that what's going to sustain the company? And there are plenty of other amusement parks and amusement park franchises that did go away, that don't have stickiness. And why is that? We can pause and ask, right? What makes one different from the other? Well, Disney, first of all, many factors, right? Is the easiest answer. It's a cheat answer. And cheap, right? But as opposed to Disney World, not cheap. But the Disney has mastered spreadability, right? And they are able to kind of promote their message along all mass mediums in various forms and fashions, and it has wide audience appeal, and the substance of their content is increasingly deep because the corporation keeps, if we want to get on the kind of cynical side of dollars and cents, trades and acquisitions, they keep acquiring more and more intellectual properties that reach an even larger audience, an even broader audience, an international consumer base. And so through Disney, we can recognize how stickiness and spreadability are both operating in conversation with one another. And so, it's interesting. We're coming off a break here. We've had this hiatus from the course during a holiday season, kind of multi-holiday season, right? Semester break. But for us, we had this hiatus, and it's helpful to step away when necessary. I definitely did so, and I used some of that time. I was finishing up, been working on a chapter about looking at Disney and some of its products through that lens of spreadable media. So working on practicing being able to articulate how spreadable media model works in an identifiable setting like that. All right, so I guess I also, I think that covers it enough. Spreadability is an understanding of the dynamic nature of how information flows in the digital age, right? Is in contrast to stickiness. And this is directly resulting from the advent of widespread adoption of the internet, right? The internet, and then the authors do a great job unpacking what they call Web 1.0 versus Web 2.0, and the advancements that each has, right? The limitations of what one stage is. And this ultimately leads us to this era of how social media plays a dominant role in our use of the internet, and there are continuous offshoots of this, right? This is evolving the way we interact with media, and that's significant too. Okay, looks like we need to take another break. It's gonna be a long one. Well, who knows if you made it to the end? Probably like turn it into the one and a half times to get through it. I don't know. That's one solution. But we'll get back. We'll try to wrap up our week 3 questions for digital media literacy.